morning. Could you start by telling us who you are?
Yeah, my name's Abbey Bilinghurst.
Can you tell me a bit about what you do?
Yeah, I run a charity called Abbey, which I set up 11 years ago, and we work with girls and young women who are affected by criminal exploitation and violence that's typically associated with gangs and county line activity.
Thanks for letting us know that. I'm going to start by asking our first question now, and that is, who are your community heroes and why?
I think, hands down, my community heroes are the young women that we work with. Since setting up Abbey over the past 11 years, we've probably worked with near 1,000 young women across all of our activities. And I personally worked with a lot of young women over the years. I used to deliver all of our services when I first set the organisation up, so I was doing all the direct work. I'm a little bit further away from that now. But I'm still working closely with young women. And they're my community heroes because they experience things that nobody should have to experience in their lives. They navigate so much adversity and trauma. They're constantly fighting against the odds. They're constantly looking for support and looking to have their lives run a bit differently with very little support. And the resilience that they have to show on a day-to-day basis, their survival skills, their strategies for kind of navigating harm and risk off the scale, but often not celebrated in any way whatsoever. And actually often the girls that we work with are seen as problematic. And also, though they are some of the bravest people I know, and courageous, they're some of the funniest people I know. The charisma that they have, their fight, their attitude, their ability to kind of articulate themselves is just off the scale. And so for me, they're heroes because they are just out there surviving, and also not really rewarded for that in any way.
You've told us who your community heroes are, but now I want to ask you what the word community means to you and what a community is.
Well, I think it means lots of different things and probably will mean something very different for other people. I guess community for me is belonging, belonging to something, whether that's a group, a space, a particular location. And I think it's feeling like you're part of something, feeling like you matter. And I think for me in all of that, it's also about knowing that you can influence something and that you can influence the decisions that affect your life. For me, that's a really important part of community and citizenship, and knowing that you exist, knowing that your voice means something and that you're seen in some way. And actually those sorts of ideas were at the heart of why I set up Abbey, because actually the girls and young women that we try to reach are often invisible in systems and services, and particularly within the policy landscape around gangs and county lines. Predominantly there's a focus on boys and young men, and so young women's very unique experiences of that harm and those abuse types often gets missed. So that really links directly to me the sort of the fact that the girls that we're working with are often invisible within systems and services and community sometimes. So that's a real kind of direct link for me about community, and again that sense of belonging and being seen and having your voice heard and having your voice influence decisions that affect your life was central to me setting the organisation up.
You did quite a good job of answering that question, but also answering my next question, which is why is community important? Would you like to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me personally, community is important because it's a space where I feel safe. I know in my local community where I live, where my children go to school, in the streets that I kind of walk every day, I feel safe, mostly. I mean, as a woman, that safety is kind of impacted a bit. But I know it. I'm familiar with it. I have relationships there, whether it's relationships with the guys in the local shop or whether it's with, parents who put their kids in the same school my kids are at, whether it's the facilities I use locally. There's a familiarity there. And with that, I think, comes safety. And so for me, that's really important. And I think in terms of the young people that we work with, often that doesn't exist. It does in some shape or form. They build their own community. They're building their own community of peers and friendships where they can seek solace and safety and belonging, and there's a shared experience there. But often there's also a lack of safety and that sort of sense of belonging for the young women that we work with particularly.
Talking about our local community and the issues that can arise in our local communities, could you tell me a bit about your memories of the riots?
Yeah, the riots for me that I think of are the 2011 riots. I live in Hackney, and the kind of escalation of kind of activity, I suppose. My memory of that was how much propaganda there was around those riots from the government at the time, and that the language that very quickly got used to explain what was going on was that it was basically young people and gangs who were responsible for terrorising. Whereas actually, and I think that kind of got weaponised by the government and by policymakers. But also in doing that, it meant that we didn't understand the real reasons why communities were up in uproar, actually, which was obviously in response to the Mark Duggan murder. And I think the propaganda around that actually silenced communities' concerns and voices, and meant that we weren't really hearing about the complexities of relationships with community and police, for example. The institutionalised racism that we know has and does exist. And so actually the really complex community issues there weren't discussed in the way that they should have been because of actually the propaganda. That was my experience at the time, that quite quickly got crafted around those riots.
Thanks so much for sharing that. I know you've told us a lot about your work already, but can you tell me a bit more about your work with youth and the community?
Yeah, for sure. I'd love to. I'm really proud of our work. So as I said, I set up a charity called Abbey. We're working specifically with girls and young women who are affected by criminal exploitation and violence. And we're one of the only organisations in the country set up to do that piece of work specifically. There's obviously loads of other great organisations and work that are doing direct work with girls and young women, but with that very kind of niche focus around gangs, county lines and criminal exploitation. We're one of the only ones. We are working towards young women being free from oppression and harm created by those issues. And we're really working to support young women to develop independence and agency. We know through our work that the systems and the services that young women navigate are primarily designed for boys and young men. We know that often those services are wildly under-resourced and are not meeting the complex needs of girls and young women. And as a small charity, we obviously can't meet all of those needs. We can't be a second social work service. We don't have the resource, we don't have the capacity to do that. So what we can do is across all of our activities, whether it's one-to-one work, whether it's group work, what we can do is create spaces for girls and young women that are safe, but where they can come and develop really important skills around their independence and agency, their knowledge increase around some of the issues that they face, really develop their critical thinking and critical consciousness, so actually they can go back into those systems that don't always work for them, don't always meet their needs, feeling a bit more equipped, feeling more able to identify what they need, being more able to articulate to services actually what they need, knowing what their rights are within those systems and services. So they've got that independence, that self-efficacy. That's the stuff that we can do, and we do it really well. We work in a very specific way. We're really participatory and we're really solution focused. And the young women we work with quite like that, because actually what we see is a lot of their experiences across services is that they've been let down systematically. They're often seen as the problem. and that they can't be helped. They're seen as aggressive, promiscuous, she keeps putting herself at risk, all of those things. Whereas actually the way that we're working is we're helping young women to create a new narrative about her own identity and about her competence. And so she's hopefully going to be much more able to notice her own skills and strategies and how remarkable she is, and obviously why they're my heroes. So we work in a very kind of specific way with young women to try and kind of push back the tide, I guess, of how they've experienced quite deficit-based services in the past.
And could you tell me about some of the opportunities you've created for young women?
Yeah, 100%. So we deliver a range of services. We do work directly with girls and young women. So we offer one-to-one support services, and they go through kind of a structured program and do really kind of have really important conversations. But we also support them through advocacy as well and accessing the services and support that they need. We deliver group work. That's a bit more preventative. So we're in schools, we're in community settings, working with young women where there may be vulnerability and risk around gangs, county lines and criminal exploitation. But really importantly, we don't just work with individual young women, because at Abbey we think if we want sustainable change, we actually have to be in the spaces and places around that young woman. We have to be in the systems and services, and we have to be trying to influence change at policy and commissioning level. So we've got activities across all of those spaces. So that includes, for example, community contextual safeguarding programs, where we're trying to understand from young women what changes need to be made in communities to increase safety in communities. We deliver national training programs to police, social services, education, health, and that's really trying to educate and increase the visibility of young women who are affected by these issues. And we've got a young women's advisory group.
I have one last question to ask, and that is, if you had any advice to give to a younger you or other young people, what would it be?
That's such a hard question. I think, they all sound like cliches. Don't give up. I think, first of all, even if all the voices around you are telling a certain story about you that might be negative, or that you feel that kind of everywhere you look, you're problematic in some way, is to actually believe you're something different than that, and that you're worth something, that you're important, that your voice matters, and that actually the questions that are being asked of you maybe need to be different, and that's not your responsibility. I guess as well, in terms of when you're striving, if a young person's striving to, do the thing that they're really interested in, or that they want to do with their life, don't give up, of course. But actually something that I've learned is just do a thing, do one thing, and do it really, really well. Don't spread yourself too thin, but start small, start from that nugget, start on the thing that you feel really passionate about and that you enjoy doing, and work from there, but do it really, really well. And then over time, that will evolve and grow. So they sit in the infrastructure of our organisation, where we've got a constant feedback loop with girls who are impacted by these issues, and they're helping us to make our organisation as good as it can be, but we're also doing work with them externally to influence policy. They do a lot of consultancy work. So it's that real, and we've got lived experience consultants who are working shoulder to shoulder with us out there in the world, trying to influence change so that services are more effective for other girls and young women affected by these issues. So that's broadly what we do. It's quite a lot. We punch above our weight. We're very, very small, but we do a lot of work.
And what would you say the impact, if you had to choose or sum up in a short sentence, what is your impact? What is the impact you've created?
I mean, I said it earlier, but I guess young women primarily having achieved the changes that she wants in her life, So that's the first thing that we work towards. But also young women noticing their own independence and agency, and noticing their own skills and strengths and resources. Those are the really kind of fundamental changes that we work towards and have created. And I'm just incredibly proud of the network of young women that has evolved through our work, and I hope we haven't got it right all the time. We've made mistakes along the way, 100%. But ultimately that young women moving on from our work have experienced something different and actually have got a much greater sense that they've got a rightful place in the world and that their voice matters and that they can influence decisions that affect their lives in some shape or form.
Thank you so much for letting me interview you today.
Thanks, Charlie.